Thank you for doing this again, DeWayne. I appreciate your time with this and meeting me here. Last time, we talked about the history of traits as well as your own personal history and business history, which is super valuable in just creating a base of knowledge of where psychometric assessments can help people. Today in this session, what I'm hoping to do is delve into what are those natural points in every company's history or growth where they're going to struggle at certain times. If companies prepare for these hurdles ahead of time, they're going to be able to kind of blast through them a little bit quicker and grow in the ways they want to. From previous conversations, as well as doing some strat planning sessions, as I watch you, I learn so much. And my hope is that we can start to help companies hit higher levels of growth faster because they are preparing for these things. Does that make sense? How would you word that maybe a little bit differently? And where would you go from there?
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think one of the things that I've learned about businesses that are trying to grow and are having problems doing it is that they struggle to try to figure out what their strategy should be. So they know how to do something well, whether it's manufacturing or building or providing services or professional services in some fashion or another, and that's what got them to the place they are. People like their product, like their services, like their prices probably, and so they keep buying more and tell others about them. So as that growth occurs, the business realizes that there are things going on inside it that are not working as well. Oftentimes things like business development or financial reporting or having accountability or human resources or safety, some things inside there are not really keeping up with the growth and development of the business. And so at some point, the leadership team or the owner, if it's an entrepreneurial business, realizes that they need to start thinking a little further down the road about their business. And most businesses, as they grow, just usually think about the year that they're in or maybe only the quarter that they're in. They try not to get too far in front of them because it's too difficult for them to see the future in some fashion or another. And so strategy is probably in many ways the best way to deal with the greatest risk in business. And the greatest risk in business is the future. And that greatest risk is because you can't calculate the future. You can't analyze the future. You can't predict the future. The only thing you can do with the future is to visualize it. And they're not used to doing that. They haven't built the muscles, the techniques, the processes to visualize the future. And so they find themselves becoming at times overwhelmed with sales, but yet they don't have the infrastructure to produce the product or deliver the service or make it different or better even perhaps in some cases. So this idea then of learning how to think about your future in a more clear way, a more specific way, is something that most businesses don't really experience until they get to some point where things are going so well that it starts to break itself. Things are falling through the cracks and individuals are getting overwhelmed by their job because now instead of having one or two people reporting to them, they may have 5 or 10 people reporting to them, and people reporting to them that are doing things they don't necessarily understand. So that creates an internal pressure in the business that then really, for the most part, I think, causes the owners to realize they have to stop just trying to sell something every day and instead try to visualize their future. What direction are we going? Should we be selling twice as much as we're doing right now 3 years from now or 2 years from now? Should we be selling it in different places? Should we be making it in a different way? Do we need some new talent and skills in our business to do things that our clients are saying right now, we'd like to get more of this from you or more of that from you, and we haven't thought about that, we haven't prepared for that, and we're realizing now that we actually need to become way more intentional about our future. And that's when this idea of strategy becomes way more meaningful for them and way more useful for them as a business as well.
That makes sense to me. Now, going back just a little bit, would it be fair to say that the first hurdle that any business has is sales? Just bringing in enough revenue to keep lights on and everything going. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, so you got to start up sales, or we're figuring out sales. We're starting to grow a little bit, and maybe adding a few more employees. What is the first major strategic or future planning hurdle that an organization is going to run into? How big are they? Maybe what is their revenue? What are some similarities between most companies?
It's a $20 million business that's that's providing some kind of a product or some kind of a service, maybe an oil field service or something like that, they usually have an infrastructure problem. So that usually tends to be the first thing. So infrastructure could be their facility is too small, they don't have enough manufacturing equipment, they don't have enough vehicles in the field to do what they're doing if they're providing some kind of an oil field service or construction service. And so what they find themselves doing then is just trying to increase people's intensity of work. So instead of working 8 hours a day, they get you to work 9 hours a day or 10 hours a day. And the people want to do it because they see the benefit, they see the growth, they see the way that the marketplace is responding to what they're doing. So there's a lot of attraction for the employees doing that, but they also find that at some point that it just becomes too difficult for them to be able to keep putting in those kinds of hours or trying to find people and get them into positions that aren't really ready to do that kind of work.
Okay, so for the first then hurdle that you're talking about, up to that $20 million revenue mark, it's really about stretching people too far instead of maybe having the right people in place or in the right positions. Is that accurate?
Yeah, stretching people too far. And the people that are there want to do that. They see the way the marketplace and clients and customers are appreciating, enjoying, and liking their service or their product. So they're motivated to want to put in the extra effort to make that happen for their business. But at the same time, they realize they're paying some kind of a price, often personally, because of that extra time or effort or evenings or even weekends that they have to put in to do it. So on one hand, it's really exciting to be a part of something that is growing and flourishing and it's very visible and obvious. On the other hand, there's this price that people start to pay as a consequence of success.
Okay. Well, I was going to go and maybe document what is the next hurdle, but I think let's sit here for a little while. So how does this show up in an organization? How does a leader understand or start to see that people are being pushed too far or that they need to change something?
Usually there's going to be some kind of a product or service problem. So there will be customers or clients that they've done business with maybe for a period of time in their existence, and suddenly those customers are calling them and saying, well, why aren't you here? Or why isn't that available for me to pick up? Or I need 5 of these and you sent me 2. Well, I can't, I need 3 more. When am I going to get 3 more? So usually there's some kind of a problem or problems that start to surface, and those problems become very visible to the owner because a salesperson or a production person or a finance person is going to go into to the owner or the boss and say, listen, we got a client that's really upset with us because we haven't done this or they're looking for this and we can't do that. So that it's usually a problem. The problem is really what starts to cause somebody who owns a business, if it's an entrepreneurial business or some partners, to realize that this isn't going as well as it could. Why are we at this point, when people really like what we do and like our services or products, are now becoming upset with us in some fashion or another? And then I'm watching as our employees are dealing with that, and they're becoming demotivated because they don't want to talk to those people and tell them I don't have that, or not going to be able to get that to you for a period of time, or my crew's not ready, they'll be ready next week. And so those kinds of problems begin to bother the employees in the organization who've helped to make it successful, and now they're getting this feedback from people outside of the organization saying, you're not doing the job for me anymore. That really creates a lot more motivation for the owner to say, okay, we have to start doing something much different than we're doing right now.
That makes sense. So people are being pushed. They're happy to do that. But now there's almost some dissatisfaction in their job of going, hey, I'm not able to do what I need to do. Something's getting in the way.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I know what we do is valuable. I know people like it because we're getting more requests for it, and clients are asking us to show up more or send more or make more for us. Why are they now suddenly saying that they're upset with us because they can't get enough or we're not showing up fast enough? Yeah. Those are the people who helped us to grow our business and make us successful, and now they're actually now unhappy with us. Yeah. How did we get to that place?
Okay, so with this then, I'm assuming that up to $20 million in revenue, often there's one person at the head of the company that is still doing a lot. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And what are they up to?
Yeah, very, very, very much the case. And the person probably has a very deep body of knowledge about something. If it's if it's a construction business, for instance, that person knows how to build things. They can go out and build things themselves if they have to. They know how to price things. They know all the activities that you need to manage a project and how to build schedules for them and how to find subcontractors and suppliers. They know how to do all of that themselves. But realize, though, that if they have 3 buildings going on at the same time, they need 3 of them to be doing that because one person really can't do all of that themselves. So they go and find another project manager, an estimator, or a superintendent to help them build those projects for themselves. So then they realize at some point that I need to find people with different bodies of knowledge. I'm good at doing these kinds of things, but I'm not really so good at doing these kinds of things. So then they go and hire someone to do. And so the org structure starts to evolve when they start bringing new people into the organization. In the construction industry, for instance, the idea of an estimator and a project manager is something that, regardless of whatever part of the construction industry you're in, those 2 jobs, estimator and project manager, are on every org chart. Smaller businesses, smaller construction companies think that those should be the same job, that the estimator should also do the project management work and the project managers should also do the estimating work. So when they get to about 20 million or 30 million, they suddenly realize those are actually 2 very different jobs with 2 very different kinds of people that need to do them. But up until then, they've jammed them together. And usually what turns up as a consequence of that is that the person who's a really good estimator struggles to do project management. They're maybe not failing at it, but it's not working as well. The scheduling is not being met, or there's some deficiencies that are showing up too frequently. And the person who's a really good project manager finds that the estimating activity is a bit boring for them, and they don't really like doing it, and so maybe they're a bit too casual, and therefore they miss costs and items that should be in the estimate, and they only discover it when it's being built, and the project manager is now saying, hey, how come we don't have these kinds of things in our estimate or in our budget? Who missed that? So they realize then that there's a point in their evolution where they need to separate those activities and actually create 2 different jobs with 2 very different kinds of people that need to do those jobs. So that's part of the maturation process, I think, of growth, when you realize that yes, a project manager can do estimating, yes, an estimator can do project management, but really they're going to be much better at one of those than the other. And so when the owner realizes that, when those individuals realize that, that's when they start to become a little more sophisticated in how they set up their structure, separate the work, and get people to really do the kinds of things that they're much, much better at every day.
I know that a metaphor you've used before that I've heard you use multiple times is that there are cracks everywhere in every business. But as growth takes place, those cracks can become wider. They become chasms. So that's almost the picture that I've got here, is that, again, the owner did everything in the beginning, legitimately did everything. They wore all the hats. Now they're starting to farm those hats out, delegate those hats, and sometimes those hats need to be broken down more because the hat still includes, as an umbrella, 2 or 3 positions. Those cracks are starting to become chasms. Things are breaking down. People might get frustrated at times because they know they can offer more. They know they're falling short in some ways, but they don't know what to do about it. Owner becomes aware of that. What are the next steps for the owner? What does this organization need to do in order to move to the next stage so they can continue to grow and keep customers and clients happy?
I think the most important thing that they need to do is actually start to build their enterprise strategy. Mm-hmm. They need to start thinking about, where is their business going to be 3 years from now? Not 5 years, not 1 year, but 3 years from now. Yep. And because that's a visualization process as opposed to a prediction or calculation or analytical process, they need to have the most important people in their business in the room doing that. It's not something that the owner should be doing by themselves, or if it's a partnership, the partner's doing it by themselves. They need to have the people that are most important in their business. Maybe it's a finance manager, maybe it's an HR manager, maybe it's a business development manager of some kind. They need to have those people in the room to make sure that all dimensions of that business are being represented as they think about the future of the business. And they need to start thinking about, what is it that we should be doing 3 years from now? What should our revenue be? Can we double our size? Is that possible? Should we be adding 50% revenue to it? So they have to figure out, how effective are they today? And if they're to continue to keep doing the same things, what does that translate into in terms of a revenue business and a profit business 3 years from now? And then they need to start thinking about, are there some things we've learned about ourselves in this history to date that we're not really doing very well? We can do it, but we're not doing it very well. And so we need to make a decision about whether or not we should stop doing that. Maybe it's a type of work, maybe it's a kind of structure or a kind of product that they're making or a service. And they say we should be doing less of that because we're not doing it as well as others. And let's focus the energy and the effort and the investment in building the things that we know we're really good at and that we do better than other people that are doing the same things in the marketplace. So it takes some good discussion about that. It's not just one person's idea. Everybody needs to agree that we should stop doing this or do less of this, and we should be doing way more of these kinds of things because we do them so well. Our clients really value that and come back and ask us for more. So it's getting much more focused about what it is that they should have as their key strategy in growing their business. I think one of the things that also comes up as they're thinking about their future is whether or not they should be expanding their services or their products. Are we at a place right now where we can introduce this kind of a service or go into this kind of a geography that we're not involved in right now because we know that what we do is being done better by us than other choices the owners or the purchasers have that use us. And so we want to take our capabilities and move them into a different place or develop a new product or develop a new service of some kind, so that you start to see the business realizing that in this maturation process they can become way better at doing something, and they'll get better at doing it by stop doing some of the things they're doing now, not doing some of the things they're doing now.
Yeah, that's got to be so hard for every organization. I think my organization is very small, but when you know you're doing it, many things well or fairly well, and you have to say no to certain parts of it, that's got to be terrifying. Again, when everything has been sales and revenue driven up till this point, to say we're going to say no to certain things so that we can say yes to things that will grow far bigger. There's got to be a frustration or a fear that comes up in a lot of owners that way.
Yeah, there is, and maybe even more so with their staff. Especially the people that are around the strategy table and helping to formulate the future of the business, because at some point this becomes personal. You say, okay, so if we're not going to do this anymore, what does that mean to my job?
Yeah.
And my future. So there is a risk that people have when they start thinking about what it is that we should stop doing. And that's why this visualization process, thinking about 3 years down the road, that picture, when it gets clearer, is going to have all kinds of growth that happens as a consequence of it. So those people who are sitting there and thinking, oh, my job could be at risk, suddenly realize, well, actually, that's not the case. What's going to happen is we're going to do a whole bunch more of these kind of things. We're going to probably need more of me out there to do those kind of things. So there's a motivation for them to say, you know what, I may not like not doing these things or stop making this product or providing that service, but I see if we get really focused and intentional about these other areas that we do so well, that's going to be way more valuable to us and way more motivated to me at the end of the day. So we go from this being just a sort of a strategic direction to actually individuals embracing that and being more motivated to actually want to make that to help accomplish that as the enterprise continues to grow.
This brings up another question for me now. I'm thinking about this leader who has been able to be a jack of all trades and really fill in wherever they're needed at different times. What is the shift in focus of that leader as they're coming to this point? Because I hear you saying people need a different kind of encouragement or a different type of leader as you're going through this transition as an organization. Is that accurate?
I don't know that they would need a different kind of leader. I think what they would realize is that there's too much responsibility on one person called the owner or the entrepreneur, and that person is now is a bit of a stumbling block for the organization to continue to grow, because so many things have to go through that person. Purchases or decisions or hiring or firing or expanding geography or buying some new equipment or whatever it may be. And that owner, entrepreneur, has for the most part been the best person to make those decisions because they know so much about what it is that they're manufacturing or service delivery they're providing or products that they're selling. So that owner realizes that they have to find a way to get decision making and problem solving further strengthened within the business. And sometimes that means that they're going to take somebody that's doing a really good job in some department of their business and elevate them to more of a leadership role in that area. And so maybe the project manager, one of the project managers would become the construction manager, and so the project managers now report to that construction manager. That construction manager position position didn't exist before, but now it does because the owner realizes they need those project managers need to have a leader to go and talk to about their daily activities, and the owner, the president of the company, is no longer available to do that. And so now if the project managers can't get that kind of interface, schedules get hampered, owners get irritated because we're not being responsive to them, etc., etc. So that idea of trying to get more leadership capability or management capability within their business suddenly becomes much more clear to them. And growth kind of forces them in a good way to go and find other kinds of talent in their business and start to put those people in some kind of leadership or management roles within their organization.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. So the leader, again, has now become the bottleneck. And as the leader becomes the bottleneck, because all decisions flow through them, they have to delegate and really trust a new team that they're creating to do the things that they were controlling completely before. So as that's happening, how does the ideal leader's focus need to change? Where are they putting their time and energy? Instead of being the bottleneck, where do they focus their energy?
Well, what they discover is that if they have some talented people that are working for them and are taking care of the finance or the production or the construction or the sales, that they're going to probably be thinking about the future of the business in a much more serious way. So they'll be doing things like looking at what is our competition doing in the marketplace? Why do they do that so well? Why can't we do that? Why don't we do those kinds of things? I think it may take some more investment or maybe some new people, but we should be able to do those things equal to or better when they are. So they're thinking about those things. They're thinking about this idea of how do I find different kinds of clients or customers out in the marketplace? Where are there people that could and should be using what we have, but so far they don't know about us, or we haven't found them in some way? And so they're thinking about how do we create that growth, those new customers and or those new services and products. So they start thinking more about the future of the business rather than just what's going on every day. They have to manage that. They have to have a focus on that for sure. But now they have this opportunity to think more about the future of the business. And what I find is that becomes way more attractive to them, because as they learn how to think about the future, they get their business much more focused, and therefore the staff and the organization feel like they have much more clarity about their future. And when employees feel they have clarity about their future, they're way more motivated and determined to stay in that business as well.
Which makes complete sense. So there's almost a shift from being on the tools to a focus on the business in some ways, which happens multiple times as leaders grow, I'm sure, as businesses grow. There's also, it seems like, a shift of focus to telling people how to do their job in some way, to more sharing what the vision is and allowing people to do their job. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And for many entrepreneurs, owners especially, that's a very hard thing to do, because they have invested usually a reasonable amount of money or a great deal of money and their entire being into creating the business and the products or services that they have. And they're so intimate with so many, if not every dimension of it, that there's a risk they feel by having people who are perhaps unknown to them because they're bringing them in from some outside organization and they're putting them into a responsible position. So they feel some risk with that. And it's hard for them to at times learn how to let go of something without always wanting to peek over the shoulder of those people and say, what are you doing and how are you doing? Oh, have you thought about this? Or why don't you try this? In other words, a little too much micromanagement. And as soon as you do that with people that have management and leadership capabilities, it starts to create tension between that leader, owner, manager, and those senior managers or executives. And that's usually a risk that many entrepreneurs don't anticipate, because they don't wake up every morning and say, I'm going to go and see what everybody's doing every day. But they also realize that if they're not there involved in it in some fashion or another, that good things may not happen. And so they need to learn that about other people.
Which is fair, because most leaders are so capable and they realize quite quickly that there's going to be a lack of efficiency no matter who they delegate to on some level compared to what they believe they themselves are capable of, right? So that makes sense to me. Now let's go back to something you've alluded to earlier. One thing we're talking about consistently is there needs to be an org redesign. Often we're talking about this or alluding to it in this conversation so far, and yet you have not mentioned that once. What you've consistently come back to is strategy, strategy, strategy. So fill that in more. Why is strategy ultimately far more, or why does it need to take first priority over the org design?
Well, strategy is what drives org structure. If you don't have a strategy, a clear picture of where you want to be and believe you can be 3 years from now, if you don't have a specific picture about that, it's very difficult to design or develop any kind of an org structure, because an org structure by definition has to be a vehicle to accomplish your strategy. And if you don't have a strategy, then all you're going to do is hire people when you need them and for no other reason. And that's not a bad idea. But if you've decided that, for instance, you want to do less of these kinds of things, products or services, because now that you've been doing them for a period of time, you're realizing they're either not as profitable or you're not as effective with them, or there's less demand for those products or services, so we need to change our strategy and drive in a different direction or develop new or better kinds of things. And so what do I do with the people that are doing those things now, and what happens to them? And so there's this tension in the business about trying to kind of keep doing everything we're doing, even though some of it may not be as good as what we should be doing or as profitable as what we should be doing. So that's why strategy is hard to do. You have to visualize this future and saying, we will be better if we did less of this or none of this. What are we going to do instead to create more growth and create more value for the customers that we're working with? So that becomes, I think, then much more clear for not only the owner or the partners of the business, but for the key leadership team people in the enterprise. So then they realize then that, yeah, we should be doing more of this. And so how do we achieve that now? So if we say we want to grow our business by 30 or 40 or 50% in 3 years from now, and by the way, you don't need a strategy or a strategic plan if you're looking at your future and saying 3 years from now we want to be 10% larger in our revenue. And I would say to them, well, don't spend any time doing strategy. Don't worry about a plan. Maybe just show up 5 minutes earlier every day and go home 5 minutes later every day, and just let gravity and a little extra time, and in 3 years you'll have a 3% growth per year, and inflation will be some of that, and you don't really need a plan. Just show up a little earlier and go home a little later every day, and ask everyone to do that. But if you decide, because you've got enough experience in the marketplace with your business and your clients and your competition, and you decide that we want to grow our business by 50% in 3 years from now, and we believe that's achievable, it's not just a dream, it's not just a hope, we believe it's achievable, well, that means that you're going to have to probably you're going to grow 15% a year. So next year, where are you going to get that extra 15% of revenue? And the following year, that 30% of revenue by that point. And they realize, well, okay, we need way more business development capability. Then we need a lot more estimating capability. Then we need a lot more project management capability. And so they realize that those are the holes in their organization that they need to be much more intentional about fixing and creating and fixing and strengthening. So now that becomes a part of the strategy to increase their business. Now we have to have a structure. Well, how many estimators do we need? How many project managers do we need? How many business development people do we need? When do we bring them on?
Yes.
We can't hire them all at the same time. So how do we actually implement this? And so that's part of that's what a strategy process actually enables a business to do, is to decide that they're going to make that decision, make that kind of growth, and then come back and start to put the infrastructure, the investment in place to enable them to accomplish those things. That's when an org structure becomes really important for them to understand what they need to do.
I think this has been key for my own understanding of business development, is that org redesign is a tool, not an end goal or anything like that. It's a tool to reach something. It is not, I've seen this in a lot of organization, a bandage thrown together approach to tackle the problems that are already showing up in the business. It's to promote future growth, to hit future goals. And I think that's fundamentally different. Some people are putting bandages on everything, whereas if you have a leader that is able, which goes against human nature in so many ways. We are short-term thinkers as a general rule. And I think that's what separates leaders in so many ways, is that they are able to think strategically long-term and visualize, as you've spoken of. But as they are able to put in this visualization of the future, 3 to 5 years down the line, and start to put a plan together, that org redesign is now a tool that you institute in place to reach those goals, part of the plan to reach those goals, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so it becomes probably the equivalent of what you and I would call a roadmap for the business. It shows how the activities in the business are now going to be organized. So at one point, there may have been a role in the business that had human resources, safety, IT services, all reporting to the same person, only to realize that that's like having brain surgeons and foot surgeons working for the same boss, and it's all on the same body, but two very, very different parts of the body. This probably isn't going to work very well very long. So they realize they need to start to separate these things and get them more specialized and more focused and reporting to the right kind of leader or position in their organization. So I think the structure then helps them to see that we have got, say, 3 or 4 business development roles that we need. So now we can write a job description for those so that they're not doing it 3 or 4 different ways. They're all doing it the same way. They may be focused on different kinds of customers or products or markets, but they're all doing the same kind of activities every day. So now the structure helps to bring much more cohesiveness and repetitiveness in terms of what goes on with business development. Not that they all need to walk the same way and talk the same way, but they have to do these kinds of activities every day with these kinds of prospects or customers. So it helps to bring that accountability in place and productivity in place for people to do their jobs in a way that is way more effective for the business.
That way, which is going to change. You brought job descriptions into play, but so many job descriptions are fairly bland or fit maybe a role 5 or 10 years back rather than what is currently needed. The vision that you're kind of painting here, DeWayne, is that so the strategic plan is in place. Now we've got to start to build a roadmap to get there. It includes org redesign, and as an organization works on that redesign, they're able to come up with very specific roles that can be held accountable, that can be more efficient because they know exactly what they need to do, rather than more general or a little bit off of what the role truly needs to be. Is that accurate? Where would you fill in more there?
Yeah, that's a very good description of it. And often what I find when we're first talking to organizations that need some kind of strategy and maybe need some kind of org design work on it is that there's a bunch of jobs on the org chart, their current org chart, that are built for the person that's doing that. And so you realize as you're talking to that person that they're doing this and this and this and this, and you kind of say, why are you doing all of those things? Why is that part of your job description? And oftentimes the answer is, well, we've been growing, DeWayne, and so the boss said that, somebody needs to do this kind of a thing, and they think that I can do that, and so they've added that to my job description, and so I'm doing that, and I know I'm not maybe great at it, but I can get it done, and so it's part of my responsibility. So that's part of the impact of growth, is that you can't hire everybody you need to do something different immediately. Everybody has to have some kind of a transition process as you go from 10 million to 20 million or 20 million to 30 million in revenue. There's going to be some job or a number of jobs that are going to have a bit of an expanded role at some point because we can't quite afford a full-time person doing it, but those activities need to be done by somebody. So most employees are good with that because they see that the growth is giving them more security, more opportunity, more motivation, more income, often more rewards for what they do. So they're willing to make that investment. They're willing to stretch themselves. They're willing to do some things that they may not feel they're expert at, but they can get them done in some way or another. But you don't want to have a whole bunch of people in your organization that are kind of experiencing that every day. At some point, you have to be able to say, let's get you into your sweet spot or into your lane because that's what the business needs, that's what you're good at, and let's make sure that we're clear about that and take the things out of your role that we need somebody else to do and or create a different or new new position around. So that's, again, part of this maturation process as businesses grow and evolve. And the strategy is what really drives that at the end of the day. We all know that we're going there. We know that we're going to suddenly need to have somebody do safety in our business. And right now it's just 2 bullets on 3 different job descriptions. And now we realize that the volume that we've got and the size that we're at, that actually needs to come out of 3 job descriptions and become a job description all by itself. And it's required and justified in order to make the business more safe.
An image comes to mind, or a metaphor. I have a friend out in Ontario who started a composting business. Started it out of his garage, and it was him and his wife and his like 8-year-old helping him out, and started with a minivan, and they were able to throw everything into the minivan. And then as it grew, they had to buy a trailer and put a hitch onto the minivan to truck more stuff around. But it quickly became evident that patching more things onto this minivan are not going to work. Yes, it was needed on some level, but eventually they had to take a step out of it. He needed to take a step out of his business and say, long term, a minivan's not going to cut it. Long term, we need a couple of trucks to do one specific job or one part of one division of work, and we need another vehicle to maybe be what I get to work in and do some other things with, have business meetings and sell and do whatever else I need to do. And again, there's this aspect that I keep thinking about as you're talking, DeWayne, about how good organizations, we're not calling them names, we're not saying they're bad organizations anyway, but organizations consistently become less efficient if they're going through growth as they're patching things on. And that the key in this process is a leader being able and willing to step back and say, again, what are we going to need in the future, and how can we start putting that in place instead of continuing to add modules to this minivan, correct?
So let me say that a different way.
Yeah.
When I meet organizations that are looking for strategy help, one of the first things I ask them for is their org structure. So I ask them about their growth, about their history, and try to understand a bit more what they're doing and why they've achieved the success they have. And once we have those conversations and I have a bit of a picture of that, I ask them to show me their org structure. And so they show me their org structure. Now I have a context because they've given me a bit of the history and what it is they do and where they do it and why they're good at what they do. Then I look at their org structure, and almost in every instance I can think about in the last 25 years that I've been doing this, almost every organization has the same kind of, I have the same kind of observation. You're a $50 million business in overall revenue, and you have a $40 million org structure. Or you're an $80 million business, and you have a $60 million org structure. Or in the case of your example, you're a $1 million business with a $500,000 org structure, right? So the challenge that businesses have is recognizing that they're not organized properly to do the business that they're doing. And so they're pressing people to do all of these different things and or more things, or show up earlier and stay later, or go work in the weekends, work in the evenings. And they're starting to see the consequences of that. The stress people feel, the tension that comes in relationships, communication starts to erode internally because people are just feeling too stretched. They don't have time to discuss problems or go to meetings or contribute to different kinds of things. And so that stress then becomes a problem for the organization in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, as you described. But it also creates relationship problems in the business. And that tension then starts to create different kinds of unintentional issues and problems in relationships that show up with staff, with productivity, with clients, with suppliers. So those are the signs and the signals of you're a $50 million business with a $40 million org structure. And so part of the strategy is to say, well, where are you going? Well, we want to be an $80 million business. We think we can do that in 3 years. Well, let's design an org structure for an $80 million business, and let's make sure all of this tension that's going on is addressed in that org structure. That's how you can make sure that this will have the opportunity to reduce those tensions, reduce the conflict that happens, increase the level of communications that's important for productivity within the organization, and then have more accountability of people as well, because it's very clear now what it is they have to do. Whereas when you're a $50 million business with a $40 million org structure, there's going to be a lot of different kinds of things that show up in people's job descriptions that they're not qualified to do, but somebody has to do them.
I can go a few different directions here. I'm just trying to plan my thoughts a little bit. But I guess the question I most want to ask is, okay, so we've come up to $20 million of revenue. We're noticing these chasms that were cracks before. Leader understands they need to step back even more so and plan ahead, strategically plan, their future for their organization so they can get there and develop a roadmap. What are the other hurdles that this organization needs to figure out in order to take that next step up in revenue and growth?
Probably the biggest challenge is understanding and recognizing the limitations of the people that are in your business today. And that's the hardest thing for an entrepreneur and an owner or partners in a business to do, because the people that contributed to their success are now also the people who in a number of instances are constraining their growth, because those people have reached their level of productivity and performance, and now they're being stretched beyond that. And that's starting to show up. There's usually relationship issues, some kind of tensions, things aren't moving as fast as they could or as smooth as they could, or stuff falls between the cracks. So that's usually the biggest hurdle. And from an owner perspective, if someone has made an investment in your business for these last 5 years or 10 years, and they've kind of moved up the ladder and they've shown commitment and loyalty and competency, and you're rewarding them with giving them increased responsibility, financial rewards and recognition, and then one day you realize that that person is probably at their limit of capability, and so now that person and in that job becomes an obstacle for me to grow my business. How do I deal with those people that have reached their limit of value, of competency, and still keep them in my business? But I need somebody above them that has more capability, more expertise, a different body of knowledge, different personality to kind of take us to that next step. That's a big obstacle for many owners, because they've usually hired that person, trained them, invested in them, were rewarded for all of that as that person, proved to be effective and productive. And now I have to think about, how do I work around this person or these people in their business? Some entrepreneurs find it too hard to deal with that, and so they just keep doing the same things they're doing, and their business doesn't flourish anymore. But at least they're not having to deal with the consequences of saying to somebody, you're a good man, but I need to give you a boss today.
Yeah.
A different boss today.
Well, it's such an emotionally charged decision, too, or a conversation to have with somebody, because, again, you've talked about loyalty both ways. It's not that somebody's doing anything wrong. It's not that they're deficient in some way. It's that they're ideally suited for a role that has now outgrown them. Or a different role that is needed in the organization. And yet I think about it, delaying that decision is not helpful. One, because you've talked about it's a hurdle to growth, but also because long term, I guess that it ruins more relationships irreparably than maybe it could easily have been dealt with when you say, this is going to be hard, but we're going to figure this out and help each other out going forward. Is that accurate? What have you seen there with organizations where they struggle or where they succeed?
Yeah, I think there's a motivation that an entrepreneur owner has that drives them to want to create the kind of growth that they believe is out there. There's an opportunity they see. They think they're best positioned or well positioned to accomplish that opportunity and to achieve that kind of growth in that space. And they make the sacrifice with that individual and say to them, you're a good and faithful servant, but I need someone to do this for me, and I want you to now do this. Will you do this for me? And let somebody else do that for me. And so give them the opportunity to do that. Many of those people will take that opportunity and do that, because they'll realize that they're being stretched beyond their own capability, and they're going home every day feeling less motivated and less encouraged and positive, because too many of the things they're experiencing don't feel good and are stressful to them. So many of them will actually accept that. And so the owner wins and that employee wins. Some employees will say, no, I'm the manager for that. I want to be the manager and I don't want to have a boss. I want to report to you. Those are the hard times for owners, when they have to say to that person, I can't let you do that anymore. I need to have a different skill set. So you can see where, from an entrepreneur perspective, that becomes actually very challenging for them to do. There's a personal consequence in making that decision. And I think one of the things that we try to say to clients who go into strategy is, what's the purpose of a business? And some people say, well, the purpose of a business is to create employment, and other people would say to do what clients want us to do and to make money. So there's a variety of pictures people have about what the purpose of the business is, and what its main focus should be. But really, the purpose of the business is to serve its own needs. What are those needs that the business has as it grows, as it expands, as it matures? And so if they're not clear about those things and committed to those things, they'll put the employee, in that instance's needs, above the business needs, and they'll sacrifice the growth in the business just to keep that person happy. That's when it doesn't work anymore for a company. And that's when people who are working in that business and see that employee who on a good day is just average in their performance as a consequence of the increased responsibilities they have, and those other employees start to think in their mind and oftentimes say out loud, why is that person in our company? They're over their head. And it begins to create a different kind of a problem within the organization, because it's kind of like the boss has willingly and knowingly accepted some degree of incompetency in key people in the business. Why would he or she do that?
And it might be counterintuitive, but when the business is thriving and the business is placed first, and therefore decisions are made for the success of the business rather than for an individual or ego or anything else that comes up into this, what ends up happening, like you said, is that employees end up doing better. You don't have to lay off employees when the business is thriving. You don't have to make a lot of way more difficult decisions when this organization is thriving. Whereas whether it's the leader or anyone else, if the needs of an individual or a small group of people are placed first, the organization suffers, which then everyone else ends up suffering as well. Which again is such. It was a key insight that I heard from you that really helped me start to understand this entire process better and rethink how an organization needs to run and what is the first priority.
So what's interesting about this is that everyone in the business serves the needs of the business, including the owner. The owner oftentimes makes the greatest sacrifice in serving the business. They put money at risk. They put a lot more time into doing things. They take on more chores and put in more hours than most people will within the business. So the owner exists to serve the business, and they should be rewarded for that, and they usually are, but the business doesn't serve the owner. If that happens, strategy doesn't work very well at all. But when the owner understands that their purpose is to serve the business as well as all the employees, then strategy works very, very well for them, because the owner recognizes that I'm doing this because this enterprise, which has a whole different being outside of me, needs to be served in the proper way, and I'm part of that process, and I'm a vehicle to accomplish that. That's when strategy works really, really well. If you have a strategy that is serving the owner's needs, it usually doesn't have the ability to change the business the way it needs to change the business.
Again, priorities. What is the first priority? It's the organization, as you said. So I get a feeling we're going to be talking about this in our next podcast episode here. Maybe let's step back and I'll ask a question that might seem offbeat, and if there's a better place to talk about this next time, just correct me with that, DeWayne. But where is the ideal time to start investing in 360-degree leadership surveys?
Yeah, good question. I would say that you probably need to be somewhere in the $40 to $50 million revenue size before you would look at that as a leadership development process. There's lots of other leadership development activities you can do between 0 and $40 or $50 million. 360 is a more sophisticated, more comprehensive, more intensive process. And so a leader or a senior leader or manager in the organization needs to have a boss, needs to have some peers that are on the same line in the org structure, needs to have some direct reports that are accountable to that position, needs to perhaps have some indirect reports, other people that help that department or that branch or that service, but don't work specifically for that manager, but have ongoing interactions with them. So when you have that kind of a structure, and by the time you get to $40 or $50 million in revenue, regardless of the kind of business, all of that kind of infrastructure will be in place. That's the time that this actually becomes way more valuable for an organization, and any point past that as well. That's when a manager that has a boss, peers, and direct reports has those three very different relationships that they have to manage every day. And they have to learn how to do that differently than if they are just working for a boss and don't have direct reports, or are working for a boss and just have peers. So that idea of 360 is kind of like, if we think about this from a personal point for a moment. You're a husband, you're a son, are you a brother?
Yep.
And you're a father.
Yep.
So when you think about those relationships in your life, so the voice that you use as a husband is different than the voice you use when you're talking to your parents, is different than the voice you use when you're talking to your siblings, and hopefully is different than the voice you use when you're talking to your kids. Yeah. So you learned that, you figured that out over a period of time. Probably the first voice you learned was the one that I used in talking to my parents. But did you notice how after you got married, how that voice changed? And did you notice then how your voice changed when you had kids in terms of how you deal with your spouse? So that evolution, that maturing, I think is probably the right word for it, happens in business as well. So as a manager with no direct reports, but with peers and a boss, you only develop two voices. And then as soon as you have direct reports working for you, you have to develop a third voice, because how you speak to them probably going to be different than how you speak to your boss and how you speak to your peers. So we need to learn those differences as we mature in our leadership or our management growth in an organization. And 360s are very effective for helping you to get feedback on how you're doing that with your boss or with your peers or your direct reports or your indirect reports. And it allows you to tune those voices in a much more productive and focused and intentional way. That's when it becomes really valuable for managers and leaders in organizations.
As those positions become even more complex, as more maturity is needed in certain positions, which makes so much sense to me. All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Every time I speak with DeWayne, I learn a ton. Even if I've heard the same kind of stories or the same situations over and over again. And I think that that's about my own maturity as I grow as a leader myself in business. I think I'm ready for more in some ways. So I always glean a little bit. By the way, I mean, we've talked about the first kind of $20 million of revenue in growth in an organization. We are, in our next episode, going to talk about another big leap and the hurdles that come with that, as well as the tools that you can start to implement in your own business. I'd highly encourage you, if you're doing this on your own, if you're trying to figure this out on your own, I'm a big book guy, so I'm always reading and learning, and that's great. But what I found is that cannot replace an incredible amount of coaching or help when it comes to certain things like strategic planning. I've been with DeWayne as he's done this and helped organizations kind of exceed some of their goals and plans. So what I'd suggest, if you are curious about this, DeWayne has done this with hundreds of organizations. So he brings all of those tools to a new organization with so much more unique input that will help an organization. If you are curious about that, reach out to me, reach out to Concord. I will put you in touch with somebody and have maybe DeWayne help your organization as well. He still does this sometimes to help people out. And I know the amount of time and energy he puts into this. So if you are curious, reach out, join me for the next episode. Should be coming out in another couple weeks here or so.